My name is Rajini Johnson, and today I'm putting my acting skills to the test because I'm going to be your history teacher for the day. Now, be on the lookout because I got some fun facts for you. But I'm here to talk about the most iconic group. And no, I'm not talking about Boyz II Men or New Edition. I'm talking about men that changed American history. I'm talking about the Buffalo Soldiers. The Buffalo Soldiers consisted of former slaves, freemen, and black Civil War soldiers. They were the first to serve during peacetime. Now, there's a couple of myths about how these young men got their nickname. The main myth is that the Indians gave the name to these soldiers of the 10th Cavalry because they saw some resemblance between the buffalo and their brown skin. Some that had woolly looking hair and sometimes wore buffalo hide coats in the winter. This is all in William Lecky's 1967 book, The Buffalo Soldiers. He also states that the Indians respected the soldiers because the buffalo was a sacred animal, and because they thought they had a lot of courage and a lot of fight, and because they thought that these soldiers was the best the armies ever had. In 1866, 6 all-black cavalry and infantry regiments were created after Congress passed the Army Organization Act. Their main tasks were to help control the Native Americans of the plains, capture cattle rustlers and thieves, and protect settlers, stagecoaches, wagon trains, and railroad crews. Okay, nice to have you, Sergeant First Class Smith.
Thanks for having me.
So the first question I want to ask you is, how did you find out about the Buffalo Soldiers?
Well, actually, it was kind of a subliminal thing from growing up because I used to, one of my favorite reggae artists was Bob Marley. My dad used to play him all the time, and one of his favorite songs he used to sing was Buffalo Soldier. So that intrigued my interest, and as I grew older, I decided to do a little more research and find out the achievements and pinnacles that they did in their lives and the effects that they had on African Americans.
In 1962, we were outside speaking about police brutality in all the boroughs of New York City and wondering why that we are victims of this here racial killing and no justice. And someone eased the conversation by bringing up the Buffalo Soldiers. We all looked at each other as who they?
Fun fact number 1. Former slave Cathay Williams disguised herself as a man and enlisted with the Buffalo Soldiers. Williams was the first known African American woman to enlist in the U.S. Army and the only known female Buffalo Soldier. You go, girl. I'm getting Mulan vibes. Remember when Mulan disguised herself as a man so she could be a part of the Chinese military? From 1866 to 1890s, these regiments served at a variety of posts of southern western United States and Great Plains regions, which already brings me to fun fact number 2. The Buffalo Soldiers always had to serve on the western frontier because African Americans could only serve west of Mississippi River, and because many whites didn't want to see armed black soldiers in or near their communities. How has the Buffalo Soldiers impacted you as a black man in the military?
Well, I can say they greatly impacted me as a black man in the military, being that anything's possible, no matter what outcome, no matter how dire a situation may seem. They went against the grain and they did what needed to do to succeed in their time. And in that duration, it's taught me that wherever I'm deployed to, wherever I may be engaged in combat, as long as you have a little bit of hope and willing to go against the grain to do something positive, the outcome can be exponential in your favor.
Well, the more information I got about the Buffalo Soldiers, they really did not impact me because they fight for the white man and not for their own people. And when we realized that those who were in the street with the hard times our parents were going through because of this white and injustice system.
But these young men earned a record. 13 enlisted and 6 officers got the Medal of Honor award. Now, some of these battles include the fight at Cabin Creek, the fight at Honey Springs in 1863, and let's not forget the Red River War in 1875. Now, the Johnson County War is a war that's rarely mentioned, but this war happened in 1892 in Johnson County, Wyoming. Now, this fight was between farmers and large wealthy ranchers. Now, the intruders were 52 armed men, and their mission was to shoot or hang 70 men on the list carried by Frank Canton, the leader of the invading force. These men were known to be some of the most powerful cattlemen in Wyoming. They hired 23 guns because they believed these men were rustlers and cattle thieves. Now, also during this time, there were some Buffalo Soldiers being refused at barbershops and stores. They were being taunted, insulted, and threatened. Now, there was an argument between them and a white local. Now, these soldiers snuck out of their camp and exchanged fire. One soldier was killed and 2 soldiers and a local was injured. Now, we know these men have faced extreme and deadly racism, even facing racial prejudice in Army establishments. Many officers like George Armstrong Custer refused to command black regiments even if it cost them their rank. He said they wouldn't fight and that they were afraid and they'd run, said John Smith, a descendant of Buffalo soldier Sergeant Charles Smith. So how hard do you think it was to serve back then as a black man?
Well, back then, I couldn't even fathom the thought of serving back then because African-American males were considered to be 3/5 of a man. So serving back then was definitely extremely a difficult thing to do. And I tip my hat off to those guys because they had to endure a lot of racism, a lot of wrongdoings, a lot of injustices, a lot of inequality. But they, in their minds, they were thinking towards the future.
Well, being that we've been so abused and misused and to the lowest form of humanity, we had no real thought of that. The only thing is we could think of back then was the mistreatment of our women, our children, our education, our spirituality, and the things that we wanted to get away from in order to know who we are and what we did. And finding out that we had a rich black history in Africa, the Caribbean, and in New York City. But we were not privy to that information.
After the Indian Wars ended in 1890, the soldiers were a part of the Spanish-American War in 1898, including the Battle of San Juan Hill in Cuba. Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders defeated outnumbered Spanish forces at San Juan Hill and Kettle Hill. Fun fact number 3. During the Spanish War, the terrain and climate were challenging. Troops had to deal with heat, rainstorms, mud, and yellow fever. When there was an outbreak of yellow fever in army camps, black 24th Infantry soldiers served as nurses for the stricken Caucasian troops. They ordered to do so because of the stereotype that blacks were physically better able to deal with tropical heat conditions. In 4 months of fighting, 26 Buffalo soldiers died that day. John J. Pershing was a controversial figure dealing with the Buffalo Soldiers. He served as 10th Cavalry Regiment from October 1895 to May 1897. Now, this was because he thought that the Buffalo Soldiers were real soldiers. Because of this, he was looked down upon and was called Nigger Jack by white cadets and officers at West Point. Later in the Spanish War, it was changed to Black Jack, but think about it. In the first time in American history, Pershing allowed African Americans to be under command. On August 27, 1918, the 10th Cavalry supported the 35th Infantry Regiment in a border war in border towns of Nogales, Arizona and Nogales, Sonora between U.S. military forces, Mexican federal, and armed Mexican civilians. There was also said to be German spies. But tension increased when they saw Mexicans digging trenches on the hills to look over the border and Mexican soldiers and armed civilians trying to enter Nogales. On this same day at 4 p.m., shots were fired, wounding a soldier and killing 2 Mexican officials in customs. Now, Felix B. Penaloza, the mayor, was also killed during the war, waving a white truce flag on his cane. But despite the controversy, the Buffalo Soldiers still made a significant impact on the border town. Famous jazz musician Charles Mingus Jr. was born in the Camp Stephen Little military base in Nogales in 1992, the son of Charles Mingus Sr., who was a Buffalo Soldier. They still faced racism and segregation in schools. Before World War II, the Black 25th Infantry was based at Fort Huachuca. Now, this was the home base of the 92nd and the 93rd Infantry Division. The 92nd Infantry also served in combat during the Italian campaign. Now, there was also black airmen that were trained and played a part in this war, and they're known as the Tuskegee. In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order in 1981. It desegregated the military that went against Jim Crow segregation. During the Korean War, blacks and whites were able to work together in units for the first time. Alright guys, I'm here at the Concordia Cemetery right now, and here lies behind me 42 Buffalo Soldiers. There's even so much more on these red bricks on the side surrounding the soldiers. Come take a look. Last question. One word that describes Buffalo Soldiers and what resonates with you.
One word I have to say is resilient. What those men went through was it's beyond my words or comprehension to imagine even myself in that position to be able to deal with the situations that they were able to deal with. And how it resonates with me is it instills a sense of pride and a sense of...
Well, what really resonates with me about that is I don't look at them as soldiers, because if they truly were soldiers and they understood the horror that their people was suffering under this system, white system, KKK, FBI, CIA, all of this government, they would have done something to have counter the horror that there was in being unjust, untrained, and everything else that this system had brought onto us as a people.
Shutterstock Music.
All right, guys, it was fun hanging out, but I'm a little exhausted from all this history. But before I go, I have just one more fact for you. Mark Matthews was the last living Buffalo Soldier before he died September 6, 2005. He was 111 years old. All right, guys, that's it for today. Thank you for joining me. I hope you learned all you can learn, and I hope you respect the Buffalo Soldiers, realizing the legacy they left behind and paving a way for black soldiers in the Army today. I'm Rajane Johnson, signing out.
Shutterstock Music.